Hi, my name is Isabel Mercer. 3 weeks ago, I stood on a wind-scoured cliff in Nova Scotia, the kind of place where the sea doesn't whisper, it roars. My hands were wrapped tight around a small urn, my knuckles pale from the cold. Inside were the ashes of my husband, Ethan. I had told myself the ocean breeze would feel like his breath one last time, that I'd find comfort watching the gulls dip and rise in the silver light. But grief doesn't care about poetry. It clung to me like damp wool, heavy, unshakable. The funeral had been quiet, private, just me, the minister from the little fishing village, and 2 of Ethan's old friends who made the drive from Halifax. No flowers, no polished speeches, just the thud of earth on a wooden box and the sharp scent of salt air. It was exactly what Ethan wanted. No fuss, no spectacle. "I've never liked crowds," he used to say. I had smiled at that memory even as my hands trembled. When it was over, I stayed in Nova Scotia for a few extra days, walking along the harbor, staring at boats with chipped paint and weather-beaten names. The fishermen nodded politely but didn't ask questions. That small mercy meant more than they knew. The day I left, the ferry ride back to Boston was long, the kind of long that swallows hours without you noticing. I sat alone by the window, my suitcase tucked under the seat, the urn in my lap. The winter sea was restless, slapping against the hull in a steady rhythm that reminded me of the heart monitor in Ethan's hospital room. I tried not to think about that. As the ferry docked, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The group chat with my family was still there, a thread of polite updates and surface-level conversations. I typed, "Docking at 4 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" My thumb hovered before I hit send. For a moment, I imagined the replies. "Of course we'll be there. We've missed you. How are you holding up?" The message sent, the little delivered checkmark blinked back at me. I slipped the phone into my palm, waiting. The crowd on the dock was alive with reunions, children running into their grandparents' arms, couples kissing like they'd been apart for years, friends waving wildly over the heads of strangers. I stood there, my suitcase by my feet, the urn's weight pressing into me. Ding. A reply from my brother, Graham. "Busy today. Take a cab." I stared at the screen, blinking once, twice. Before I could form a thought, another message appeared. From my mother, Patricia. "Don't make things harder for everyone." "Not sorry. No, we can't right now, just that." I didn't feel my heart sink. It was too tired for that. It just went still, like a clock that had decided it had ticked enough for the day. I typed back 2 words, "No worries." I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. The air was colder on the dock than it had been on the ferry. A gust cut through my coat, but I didn't move right away. Around me, the noise of laughter and luggage wheels on pavement felt distant, like I was watching from behind glass. A woman next to me let out a squeal and ran toward a man stepping off the ramp. He lifted her off the ground, spinning her around. People clapped. I turned away and started walking. The dock stretched into the terminal, its planks damp with the mist rolling in from the harbor. My suitcase wheels thumped over the seams between boards. The urn stayed in my grip, wrapped in the scarf Ethan had once worn on our trip to Portland. A deep navy with white stitches. He used to tuck it into his coat pocket, the edge sticking out just enough to look like he'd planned it. Inside the terminal, warm air wrapped around me, carrying the scent of coffee and fried dough. The waiting area was busy. Tourists dragging shopping bags, business travelers on calls, a group of college students laughing over some private joke. I moved past them, my eyes scanning for a quiet spot. There, near the window, was an empty bench. Not the polished wooden kind meant for comfort, but the sort that had seen too many winters, chipped paint, bolts rusting at the edges. I sat down, setting the urn beside me. I pulled my phone out again, but didn't open the family chat. Instead, I scrolled aimlessly through old messages from Ethan, grocery lists, silly memes, little be-safe notes from when I'd travel for work. My thumb paused on one from a year ago. "One day we'll live by the water, somewhere quiet." I swallowed, the lump in my throat stubborn. Outside the terminal, the sky was sliding into that muted gold that comes before sunset. I zipped up my coat and stepped toward the taxi stand. The line was short, and the drivers barely looked up as I approached. The ride into Boston was slow, Friday traffic, brake lights stretching into the distance like a trail of rubies. I stared out the window, past the warehouses and the waterfront apartments with their perfect balconies. Somewhere in there, other people were having dinners, pouring wine, talking about their week. My week had been scattering ashes on a cliff. When the cab finally dropped me in front of my building, I tipped the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment. The place smelled faintly of cedar and tea, the scent that always lingered after Ethan brewed his favorite oolong. I set the urn on the table, not ready to move it farther in. I made tea without really thinking about it. Boil water, measure leaves, pour, wait. The steam rose in slow curls, catching the lamplight. I sat at the table, both hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. On the counter sat an envelope, the one I'd placed there weeks ago but never opened. Ethan's handwriting curved across the front. For Isabel. My chest tightened. I knew I couldn't face it tonight. Not yet. Instead, I took a long sip of tea, the bitterness grounding me. Outside, the streetlight flickered on, bathing the sidewalk in amber. The world kept turning, people kept moving, but in that moment my life felt like it had paused, caught between the last chapter and the next. And deep down, I already knew. My family had no idea what was coming next. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, the streetlight outside painting long shadows across the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, memories unspooled, some sharp as broken glass, others faded like old photographs. I thought about the last time I'd been in my parents' house. It was nearly 2 years ago for Thanksgiving. The dining room was set like something out of a magazine. China plates, polished silver, candles flickering. But beneath the shine, there was always tension. The kind you could feel before you even stepped inside. My father, Leonard, greeted me with a nod, not a hug. My mother, Patricia, kissed the air near my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. My sister, Vivian, was already in the kitchen, telling a story to Graham that ended with her laugh. Loud, calculated, the kind that fills space and leaves no room for anyone else. Dinner went as it always did. Vivian talked about her latest work trip to Milan. Graham complained about traffic on his commute. My parents chimed in with news about the foundation, the Mercer Trust, the family's pride and joy. It was supposed to fund community programs, scholarships, and cultural events. But somewhere along the line, the focus shifted. The grants went to friends of the family, pet projects, and gala events that looked good in glossy magazines. I'd once tried to ask about it, where the money was really going. Leonard's expression turned cold, and Patricia said, "You wouldn't understand. This is real business, Isabel." The conversation at Thanksgiving followed the same script. My attempts to talk about Ethan's health were brushed aside. Vivian waved her wine glass and said, "Honestly, Isabel, maybe if you didn't make everything so dramatic, people would want to help more." That night, I drove home with Ethan in the passenger seat, his hand covering mine. He said nothing for a while, then finally murmured, "You can't change them." But part of me still hoped he was wrong. A softer memory came next. Our wedding day. It was a warm August morning on the coast of Maine. The ceremony was small, just 20 people, most of them friends we'd made over the years. The sky was wide and clear, the kind of blue that feels endless. Ethan had chosen the spot, a bluff overlooking the sea. We exchanged vows with the sound of waves against the rocks, my dress fluttering in the breeze. It should have been perfect. But the seats reserved for my parents and siblings stayed empty. A last-minute call from Patricia the night before had been brief. "We can't make it. Something's come up." No details, no apology. When the minister asked who was giving me away, Ethan squeezed my hand and said, "We'll do it ourselves." and we did. I kept that hurt tucked away for years, telling myself it didn't matter as long as we had each other. But every holiday, every family gathering, it showed up again. Quiet, sharp, and uninvited. After Ethan got sick, I thought maybe things would change. His diagnosis wasn't sudden. It was a slow unraveling. At first, it was just shortness of breath after climbing stairs, a lingering cough. Then came the hospital visits, the tests, the specialists who spoke in measured tones. I called my mother one evening, telling her what the doctors had said. She paused, then asked, "Is this going to interfere with your ability to keep working?" I remember staring at the phone, not sure I'd heard her right. Vivian visited once, staying exactly 45 minutes before leaving for a lunch. She couldn't cancel. Graham sent a text once in a while. "Hope things are okay." No one asked how I was holding up. No one offered to help with the endless bills. Ethan noticed, of course. One night, while I was sorting through insurance paperwork, he said, "You're doing all of this alone, Isabel. You know that, right?" I nodded, even though I didn't want to admit it out loud. The final break with my family didn't happen in a dramatic explosion. It was quieter than that, like a door closing slowly but firmly. It was the day I found out about the Mercer Trust using Ethan's name, his good name, on a promotional brochure for one of their events. They'd listed him as an honored contributor, implying he'd given money and support. In reality, Ethan had refused to work with them years ago after discovering some of the grants they approved had never reached the communities they were meant to help. He'd told Leonard to his face, "You're dressing up greed in charity's clothing." That had been the end of any cordial relationship between them. When I called my mother to ask about the brochure, she said, "It's just marketing, Isabel. Don't be so sensitive." That night, Ethan came home with a cedar box. He set it on the table, slid it toward me, and said, "For when they come for you." Inside were neat stacks of documents, USB drives, and a letter sealed with tape. I didn't open the letter then. I just looked at him and said, "They wouldn't." He interrupted gently, "They would. And when they do, you'll be ready." Lying in bed now, the memories swirled, each one stacking on top of the last until the weight was almost unbearable. I could see the pattern so clearly, years of being dismissed, diminished, treated like an outsider in my own family. And now, with Ethan gone, I knew the space they'd left in my life wasn't going to be filled by anyone else. If anything, they'd take advantage of it. I turned onto my side, facing the cedar box on the nightstand. The grain of the wood caught the dim light, and for a moment I thought about opening it right then. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I whispered into the dark, "I'm ready, Ethan. I promise." And somewhere deep inside, I felt the first spark of resolve. Morning light crept in through the blinds, painting thin stripes across my bedroom wall. I hadn't meant to stay awake most of the night, but sleep had been a stranger lately. The cedar box sat on the nightstand, waiting. I'd spent weeks avoiding it. I'd tell myself I was too tired or that I wasn't ready, but the truth was simpler. I knew that whatever was inside would change everything. And once I opened it, there'd be no going back. I sat up, my fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. The room was still. Outside, the street was quiet, save for the distant rumble of a garbage truck. My hand hovered over the box. The wood was smooth, worn slightly at the corners. Ethan had always taken care of his things, oiling the hinges, polishing the surface. It smelled faintly of him, that mix of cedar and clean laundry. I flipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged. On top, a stack of manila folders, each labeled in Ethan's careful handwriting. Invoices, correspondence, grant applications. Beneath them, several USB drives in a small zippered pouch. At the very bottom, an envelope sealed with clear tape. My name was written in blue ink, steady and sure, for Isabel. I pulled it out, hesitated for a moment, then tore the seal. The letter was only 1 page, but every word felt deliberate. Isabel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're standing in a fight you didn't ask for. You know your family as well as I do. They protect the image, not the truth. They'll twist things, use your grief against you, and try to make you doubt yourself. Everything you need is in this box. Documents, proof, the kind of evidence they can't explain away. Use it when they come for you, or for what's yours. I'm sorry you'll have to carry this weight alone. I wish I could be there to face it with you. You're stronger than they've ever let you believe. Always, Ethan. By the time I reached the end, my eyes were burning. I pressed the paper to my chest, closing my eyes for a long moment. When I set it down, something inside me had shifted. The grief was still there, but it was joined by something else. Resolve. I spent the next 3 hours going through the folders. Ethan had been thorough. There were bank statements showing large transfers from the Mercer Trust to shell companies. Invoices billed for consulting services that had no clear purpose. Emails between my father, Leonard, and a real estate developer arranging for properties bought under the foundation's name to be used for private investments. Some of the documents had notes in Ethan's handwriting. Short, precise. Check the date against the grant application. Recipient never received funds. Cross-reference with board meeting minutes. The USB drives held scanned copies of contracts, photographs of signed checks, and most damning audio recordings. One file, labeled Board Meeting. January 17th made my stomach twist. I recognized my mother's voice. We can't approve that grant, Leonard. There's no benefit to us. Just find someone who'll play ball. The others in the room laughed. I paused the recording, staring at the wall. These weren't just questionable decisions. They were deliberate acts of fraud. And Ethan had been collecting proof for years. By noon, the box was still spread across my kitchen table. I made coffee, trying to steady my thoughts. My instinct was to march over to my parents' house and throw the evidence on the table. But Ethan's letter echoed in my mind. Use it when they come for you. They hadn't yet, but I knew they would. The brochure with Ethan's name had been the first move. The rest would follow. I needed someone who could handle this, someone who wouldn't flinch. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name, Naomi Caldwell. Naomi had been one of Ethan's closest allies in his work as a community advocate. She wasn't just an attorney, she was relentless. I'd met her twice before, at small charity events. She'd struck me as the kind of woman who could walk into a boardroom full of sharks and leave them floundering. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button. What if she thought I was overreacting? What if she didn't want to get involved in a family mess? I hit call. The phone rang twice before a brisk voice answered. Caldwell. Naomi, it's Isabel Mercer. A pause. Isabel, I'm sorry about Ethan. He was a good man. Thank you. I swallowed. There's something I need to show you. Things Ethan left for me. About the foundation, about my family. Another pause, but this one felt different, more focused. How soon can you be here? Today, I said. Naomi's office was in a brick building downtown, the kind with tall windows and polished wood floors. When I arrived, she waved me in without ceremony. I set the cedar box on her desk. She raised an eyebrow. That looks important. It is. I began pulling out the folders, explaining each one, the chain of events, the recordings. She didn't interrupt, just took notes in a tight, efficient hand. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. This is enough to trigger a federal investigation, and frankly, I think Ethan knew it would be. I nodded. He told me to use it when they came for me. I think they're about to. Naomi tapped her pen against the desk. They've already started. Using his name without permission? That's a provable misrepresentation. But if we move too soon, they'll spin it as a grieving widow, misunderstanding the situation. We need timing and leverage. She outlined the plan in clipped, precise sentences. 1. Secure all the evidence. Scan and duplicate everything. Store it in multiple safe locations. 2. File preliminary claims quietly without alerting my family. 3. Monitor their next move to catch them in active misconduct. 4. Go public only when the case is airtight. Her calmness steadied me. I'd walked into her office with a box of documents and a storm in my chest. I was leaving with a strategy. Before I left, Naomi looked at me and said, "When this starts, Isabel, it's going to get ugly. They'll attack you personally. They'll try to make you the villain. You need to decide now if you're ready for that." I thought about Ethan's letter, about every cold dismissal, every calculated slight, every moment they'd made me feel small. "I'm ready," I said. That night, back in my apartment, I copied every file onto a portable drive and locked it in the safe under my bed. The cedar box went back on the table, its lid closed, but not latched. I made tea, the same oolong Ethan used to drink, and sat by the window. The street below was quiet, the lamplight pooling on the pavement. Somewhere out there, my family was carrying on as if nothing had changed, but it had. I wasn't waiting for their next move anymore. I was preparing mine. And for the first time since Ethan died, I felt something that wasn't grief. I felt ready. It was a gray Thursday when I decided to go. The kind of day where the clouds hung low enough to touch, the air damp with the threat of rain. Naomi had suggested waiting, letting the legal filings quietly build pressure. But I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I wasn't hiding anymore. I drove to my parents' house in Brookline with the cedar box strapped into the passenger seat like a living thing. The streets were quiet, lined with bare winter trees. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my hands had gone cold despite the heater humming in the car. The Mercer house looked the same as always. White columns, spotless windows, the lawn trimmed even in winter. It was the kind of house meant to impress visitors, to signal that its owners had everything under control. But I knew better. I walked up the stone steps and rang the bell. The door opened to reveal Vivian, my sister. She was dressed in a cream sweater, hair perfectly styled. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, then narrowed. "Isabel, this is unexpected." "Good," I said, stepping past her before she could block the doorway. "Where's Mom?" "In the sunroom. Vivian's voice faltered when she saw the box in my hands. "What is that?" "You'll find out." The sunroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and the roses my mother kept in vases year-round. Patricia Mercer was seated in her usual chair, reading a magazine. She looked up, her expression smoothing into something polite and unreadable. "Isabel, you should have called. And give you a chance to tell me not to come? No thanks." I set the cedar box on the coffee table between us. Patricia's eyes flicked to it. "What's this supposed to be?" I opened the lid slowly, deliberately, revealing the neatly arranged folders. Evidence of fraud, of misuse of funds, of the Mercer Trust being treated like a personal bank account. Vivian had followed me in and now stood behind my mother. "You're making a mistake, Isabel. You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, sliding one of the folders toward Patricia. "Here's the paper trail for the Harborview project. Grant money approved by the board, your board, that never reached the community center it was promised to. Instead, it went into an LLC registered to a business partner of Dad's." Patricia's fingers stayed on the armrest, but a faint tremor moved through them. "These are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," I replied evenly. "They're facts, and they're already in the hands of my attorney." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Vivian broke it with a scoff. "So what? You think you're going to take us down? You don't have the reach for that." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "I don't need reach, Vivian. I have proof, and you have motive. And if you think the press won't care about a wealthy Boston family siphoning charity money while putting on black tie galas, you're not as smart as you think." My mother's gaze sharpened. Is this about revenge? Because if it is, you should remember that family matters don't play well in public. You'll destroy your own name before you hurt us. My name, I said slowly, is the only thing I have left of Ethan that you haven't touched. And I won't let you use it. Not for your parties, not for your projects, not for anything. I reached into the box and pulled out a white envelope sealed with Naomi's letterhead. I slid it across the table. Patricia didn't touch it. What is this? Consider it your formal notice. From this moment, you are to remove Ethan's name and likeness from all Mercer Trust materials. You are also to cease any claim that he contributed financially or endorsed your activities. Failure to comply will result in a public statement, backed by the evidence in this box, sent to every major paper in the Northeast. Vivian laughed, but it was brittle. You're bluffing. Try me, I said. I stood, closing the lid of the cedar box. You have 7 days. After that, I stop being polite. Patricia's voice followed me as I turned toward the door. You think you can walk in here and threaten us? You have no idea the kind of damage you're inviting. I paused in the doorway, looking back at her. No, Mom, I have a very clear idea, and I'm counting on it. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. I carried the box back to the car, my pulse steady in a way it hadn't been in months. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught movement in the window. Vivian leaning toward Patricia, their heads close, their mouths moving fast. I imagined the flurry of phone calls that would start within the hour, the damage control meetings, the whispered discussions about how to handle me. Good, let them scramble. That evening, I called Naomi to update her. She listened without interruption, then said, You understand they'll hit back, right? And they won't wait 7 days. I'm counting on that, I said. The sooner they make their next move, the sooner we catch them in something we can use. There was a pause on the line. Then, you're more like Ethan than you realize. 2 days later, the first hit came. A glossy article appeared in the Boston Herald featuring a full-page photo of my parents at a charity gala with a caption describing their family's enduring commitment to community service. Buried halfway down was a paragraph mentioning me, how I had been graciously supported by the Mercer Trust during a time of personal hardship. I stared at the page, my jaw tightening. It was a calculated move, painting me as a dependent, implying my grief had been cushioned by their generosity. It was a lie dressed in silk. I scanned it, sent it to Naomi. She called within minutes. This is good. It's public misrepresentation, and it's recent. We can fold this into the case. They're trying to box me in, I said. Then we'll make sure the box has sharp edges. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the cedar box open in front of me, folders spread like a battlefield map. The fight had started, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. 3 days after the Boston Herald article, the opportunity came. I was drinking my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Naomi's voice was calm, but I could hear the current of urgency beneath it. A reporter from the Globe just called me. She's been digging into the Mercer Trust for months. She's heard whispers but hasn't been able to pin anything down. I told her we might have something for her, if you're ready. I looked at the cedar box sitting open on my dining table. The folders were no longer just documents. They felt like matches waiting to be struck. I'm ready, I said. That afternoon, I met the reporter, Melissa Crane, at a quiet cafe near Quincy Market. She was in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a notepad that seemed to move as fast as her questions. Naomi was there too, her presence steadying me. Melissa got straight to the point. I've been following the Mercer Trust's finances for a year. Every time I get close to something concrete, the trail goes cold. If you have documents, real documents, that tie misuse of funds to the board, we can start a story that will stick. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of grant approvals and bank transfers, annotated in Ethan's handwriting. Melissa flipped through them, her eyes widening. "These are solid. And this handwriting?" "Ethan Mercer, my late husband," I said. She nodded slowly. "I'll need more, and I'll need to verify everything independently." "You'll have it," Naomi said before I could. The next 48 hours were a blur of scanning, emailing, and cataloging files. Naomi worked with Melissa to ensure nothing would compromise the legal case, but still enough would go public to cause damage. When Melissa called 2 days later, her voice was electric. "We're running the story in Sunday's paper, page 1. Sunday morning, Boston woke up to a headline that stretched across the top of the globe. Charity or cover? Mercer Trust's missing millions. Beneath it was a photo of my parents, smiling at a gala, champagne glasses in hand. The article laid out the allegations in stark detail. Funds diverted to shell companies. Grants never delivered. Conflicts of interest among board members. Names were named. Dates were printed. The most damning section quoted an audio recording, my mother's voice cold and dismissive. "There's no benefit to us, just find someone who'll play ball." By noon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Friends, old colleagues, even strangers messaged to say they'd read the article. Some offered support. Others wanted to share their own stories about the foundation failing to deliver on promises. The backlash was immediate. By Monday, a major corporate sponsor had announced it was reevaluating its relationship with the Mercer Trust, pending clarification of recent allegations. 2 local TV stations picked up the story. A popular Boston talk radio host spent an entire segment railing against rich families playing charity while pocketing the cash. Naomi called that evening, "This is better than I hoped. They're in full damage control mode." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because Leonard just hired one of the most expensive crisis PR firms in the city." 2 nights later, the fight turned personal. I was coming back from the grocery store when I noticed a sleek black car parked half a block from my apartment. The next morning, it was still there. And again, that evening. By the 3rd day, I caught sight of a man inside, holding a camera with a telephoto lens. I texted Naomi. She responded almost immediately. "They're trying to intimidate you. Document it. Take photos. This will only help us." So I did. The real turning point came on Thursday. Melissa called me, her voice tense. "I've been contacted by 3 former employees of the Mercer Trust. They want to talk, off the record at first, but they're willing to go public if they feel safe. They've seen money vanish from projects. One even says she was told to falsify reports." That night, we met in a closed diner after hours. The 3 women sat across from me, their faces drawn but determined. One of them, a woman named Claire, said, "We've been waiting years for someone to blow this open. Your husband tried. Now it's your turn." I promised them I wouldn't let it drop. By the end of the week, Melissa had enough to run a follow-up story, this one focusing on the human cost of the Mercer Trust's corruption. The headline hit harder than the first. "Promises broken. Communities left waiting as Mercer Trust funds disappear." The article opened with the story of a youth center in South Boston that had been promised $250,000 in renovations. The money was approved, announced at a press conference, and then never arrived. Photos showed the building with peeling paint, a collapsed roof, and kids playing basketball in a court littered with debris. When people saw the images, the outrage deepened. It was no longer just about missing money. It was about broken promises, wasted time, and real harm. By Friday evening, I knew something in the Mercer family world had cracked. I got a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started. Stop before it's too late." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. That night, I pulled the cedar box onto my lap. The lid was lighter now, the folders thinner. Every piece I'd handed over was a step closer to the truth Ethan had wanted revealed. I thought about the people who'd come forward, about the youth center, about Ethan's steady voice in my memory. You're stronger than they've ever let you believe. And for the first time since this started, I realized this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone they'd hurt. By the second week after the first article, the Mercers had gone from untouchable to cornered. The press hounded them outside their townhouse. Former beneficiaries of the Mercer Trust were stepping forward in droves, each with a story more damning than the last. And somewhere in that chaos, Naomi saw the perfect moment to strike. She called me early on a Monday morning. "Isabel, the time's right. We're filing formal complaints with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office and the IRS. We'll request a federal review for wire fraud and charitable misappropriation." I sat up in bed, the cedar box on the nightstand like it had been from the start. "How soon?" "Today," she said. "But once we do, everything will change. They'll have to turn over their records. They won't be able to hide behind PR statements anymore." At Naomi's office, the air was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and paper. She had a stack of documents on her desk, each page meticulously tabbed and highlighted. "These," she said, tapping the pile, "are certified copies of every piece of evidence you gave me. The originals are in a safe location. We'll be submitting them with sworn affidavits. Once the AG opens a case, subpoenas will go out. And when that happens, they'll either have to cooperate or risk contempt charges." I glanced at the thick envelopes, the weight of years of Mercer secrets sitting there like bricks. "And the IRS? They're slower," she said, "but they have sharper teeth. If they find evidence of deliberate misrepresentation in tax filings, penalties can be criminal. We're talking prison time." The words landed heavy. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt an ache that this was what it had come to, my own family staring down federal charges. By noon, the filings were submitted. Naomi handed me a copy of the stamped complaints, her expression firm. "This is it, Isabel. No turning back now." I left her office and stepped into the winter air, the sky low and pale. For the first time in months, my steps felt lighter. That evening, the retaliation began. A press release appeared on the Mercer Trust's website. "We are deeply troubled by the recent unfounded accusations leveled against our family and foundation. These claims, spurred by a disgruntled family member, are both false and malicious. We remain committed to our charitable mission." They didn't use my name, but everyone knew. My inbox filled with messages, some of support, others vicious. Strangers accused me of tearing down my own blood for money or attention. I forwarded the worst ones to Naomi. She replied with 2 words: "Ignore them." 2 days later, we got word that the Attorney General's office had opened a preliminary investigation. They requested full access to the Mercer Trust's financial records from the past 10 years. Naomi grinned when she told me, "They'll hate this more than the articles. The AG's subpoenas are quiet. They can't spin them into a pity narrative without revealing how deep this goes." The same afternoon, a source from inside the trust leaked an internal email to Melissa, the reporter. In it, my father, Leonard, instructed staff to pause all disbursements until further notice and to review any files that could be subject to inquiry. Melissa printed the email in her next article. By the next morning, talk radio was buzzing. What's the Mercer Trust trying to hide? The real break came a week later. Naomi called me into her office, a rare smile on her face. "An anonymous whistleblower just handed over something big," she said, sliding a flash drive across the desk. "It's a video from 3 years ago, a board meeting." I plugged it into her laptop. The grainy footage showed my parents, Vivian, and several other board members seated around a polished table. Leonard's voice was clear. "We'll move the funds through Greenfield Holdings. The paper trail will be clean. By the time it cycles back, no one will ask questions." Patricia chimed in. "And if they do, we'll say the project was canceled due to lack of community interest." It was undeniable. They weren't just careless. They were orchestrating fraud. Naomi leaned back in her chair. Once this is authenticated, it's game over. We sent a copy to the AG's office. The next day, federal investigators contacted Naomi to request an interview with me. Walking into the federal building was surreal. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. 2 investigators introduced themselves, their voices calm but direct. They asked about Ethan, how he'd gathered the documents, whether I knew when he'd started suspecting the foundation. They asked about my family dynamics, about conversations I'd had with my parents in the months before his death. For 2 hours, I told them everything. When it was over, one of the investigators said quietly, "Ms. Mercer, you did the right thing. This isn't just about money, it's about the law." The following week was a storm. The AG's office confirmed an active investigation. Several major donors publicly suspended contributions. A local TV station aired the whistleblower video, blurring faces but leaving voices intact. Public opinion shifted sharply. Those who had doubted me began to question the Mercers, and those who had supported me grew louder. At night, I'd sit by my window with a cup of tea, the cedar box beside me. It was lighter now, most of its contents in the hands of investigators. But I kept Ethan's letter inside. His words still steadied me. One night, Naomi called with an update. "Federal agents executed a search warrant at the Trust's headquarters today. Your parents weren't there, but Vivian was. I heard she left in tears." I exhaled slowly. "So this is really happening?" "Oh, it's happening," Naomi said, "and we're not done yet." As I hung up, I realized something had shifted inside me. For months, I'd been bracing against the storm, waiting for the next blow. But now, I was part of the force driving it forward. The Mercers had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the truth had a voice, and it wasn't going away. Winter broke early that year. The snow along the Massachusetts coast melted in long, uneven patches, revealing damp earth and the first hints of green. I was standing on a bluff in Maine, a pale blue scarf wrapped tight against the wind, the cedar box cradled in my arms. Inside, there was only one thing left: Ethan's ashes. For months, that box had been my shield, my weapon, my reminder that the fight wasn't over. But now, the fight had shifted. The Attorney General's investigation was in full swing. Federal agents had seized more than a decade's worth of financial records from the Mercer Trust. Donors had walked away. The public had stopped buying the Mercer fairy tale. And me? I was ready to lay something down. I knelt near the edge of the bluff, where sea foam sprayed up from the rocks below. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. "I kept my promise," I said softly, my voice almost lost to the wind. I unscrewed the lid and let the ashes scatter into the air. The wind carried them outward, over the churning Atlantic, sunlight glinting off the water. When the box was empty, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, Ethan's last list of names, written in his clean, deliberate hand. The people the Mercers had hurt, the ones he wanted to help. I dug a small hole at the base of a young spruce growing just off the cliff's edge. I placed the list inside, covered it with earth, and pressed my palm to the ground. "There," I whispered. "It's yours now." The drive back to my new house in Boothbay Harbor took 3 hours. The house wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, pale blue shutters, and a porch that faced the water. The kind of place where you could hear gulls in the morning and see the stars at night. I'd bought it with part of the settlement money Naomi had secured when the first legal waves hit. The rest was already working. Seed money for the Mercer Fellowship, a small grant program for local artists and community projects. Nothing flashy, and no galas, just quiet help where it mattered. Some nights I'd sit on the porch with a blanket and a mug of tea, watching the lights of fishing boats in the bay. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel like it was holding its breath. A few months after Ethan's ashes found their place, I got a call from Claire, the former Mercer Trust employee I'd met in the diner. "You should come to the youth center," she said. You'll want to see this." When I arrived, the building looked different. Fresh paint covered the walls. The roof was repaired. Inside, the basketball court gleamed under new lights. Kids ran up and down the court, their sneakers squeaking against the polished wood. Claire led me to a corner where a group of volunteers was hanging a framed photo. It was of Ethan, smiling, standing in front of the very same building years ago. A small plaque read, "In memory of Ethan Mercer, whose belief in community never wavered." I swallowed hard. "He'd like this," I said. Claire smiled. "So do we." By summer, the Mercer Fellowship had funded 6 projects: a mural downtown, a refurbished fishing dock, a community garden, music lessons for kids whose parents couldn't afford them. The fellowship's name drew questions sometimes, especially from people who recognized Mercer from the headlines. I never hid the truth. "Yes," I'd tell them, "that was my family's name. But this is my name now." The legal process dragged on as it always does. Months turned into a year. My parents and Vivian fought every subpoena, every request for records, but piece by piece, their defenses cracked. When the indictments finally came, I read the news over coffee: wire fraud, tax fraud, conspiracy to commit charity fraud. It was all there, in black and white. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat on my porch sketching the outline of a lighthouse I could see in the distance. A boy from the fellowship, a quiet kid named Liam, came up the steps, clutching a rolled piece of paper. "My mom said to give you this," he said, handing it over. I unrolled it to find a pencil drawing of the lighthouse, its beam stretching across waves dotted with tiny boats. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You helped us see the light." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. "Tell your mom I said thank you," I finally managed, "and that I'm proud of you." He grinned and ran off, his sneakers thumping against the wooden boards. That night, I sat on the porch long after the sun had gone, the drawing propped up beside me. I thought about Ethan, about the long road from that first day back in Boston to this moment, about the truth and how it can tear things down but also clear the ground for something better. Sometimes the people who should have come for you never will, and sometimes that's the point, because when you stop waiting for them, you start walking your own shore. Isabel's journey began in loss, but it ended in strength. She faced lies, intimidation, and the weight of her own family's betrayal, yet chose truth over silence. In honoring Ethan's memory, she rebuilt not just her life, but hope for others. Her story is proof that even in the darkest chapters, we can write a better ending. So hold fast to your values, protect what's good, and remember, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's simply refusing to give up. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, your voice matters, and the kindness you give today can last a lifetime.